Thank you so much for such a warm welcoming. I really felt touched by those words. I imagine there are many new faces in the room, so wonderful to have you here. And I'll go ahead and share my slides, and I'll just assume that you can see this all right. So you can imagine I've been working in psychiatric genetics specifically, and behavioral genetics more broadly for quite some time. So I've done a lot of talks. I also really enjoy science communication. But I think I'm not sure that there's another talk that I feel as adequately qualified to talk to you about than this one, than the topic of imposter syndrome. I think there are a number of reasons that I feel equipped to talk to you about this. One is the fact that I have struggled myself with imposter syndrome across so many steps in my career, in so many different settings. Um, but I also now mentor and support a number of early career researchers in terms of navigating their experiences of imposter syndrome and provide support to departments around how they can tackle this. I also feel quite equipped to talk about this because, I've seen imposter syndrome, the impact of it, what works to combat it and what really doesn't across so many settings because I've lived quite internationally. So, as you know, I'm currently based in Oslo, in Norway. I've been here for 4 years and it still doesn't clock in my mind that I live here. I look outside and I'm back in countries that have winter. So it is very snowy, it is very cold, but the summers are beautiful. But this whole kind of cold winter thing is quite in contrast to my beginnings. So I was born in Uganda, in Kampala, the capital city in East Africa. And when I was very young, my family moved to Canada. So we moved to this small town, at least small in my standards, on the west coast of Canada called Prince George in British Columbia. And I stayed there until I was big enough and old enough at 18. I decided I need bigger things. So I moved to all the way to the other side, to the East Coast, um, to a city called Montreal. And in Montreal, I studied and did research as part of this Center for Studies in Behavioral Neuroscience. So I worked in animal models of addiction and stress, anxiety, and it was really fascinating, but I also missed people. So I decided to apply for a master's program at the Institute of Psychology, Psychiatry, and Neuroscience, so the IOPPN at King's College in London, and I got it. And it was in mental health studies. So I moved again all the way across the pond, and I ended up in London. And, when I went there, I thought I was going to be there for a year, go back to Canada. I stayed for 10. This is how life goes. But when I finished my master's, very serendipitously, I ended up going for an interview for a position which started off as a research position and turned into a PhD with the Twins Early Development Study. And this was my first introduction to behavioral genetics. I knew nothing about the area before. I'd never read a single paper in behavioral genetics. So when I tell you I went into that interview naive upon naive, I really mean I did. But I learned so much in that interview. I was so genuinely fascinated by what the people were describing. And I got the position. So I did a PhD. And during the time that I had my PhD, I also had my two sons. You can imagine that was very busy. Um, and when I submitted my PhD, I was, 8 months and some weeks pregnant. I submitted my PhD and I went on maternity leave. And when I was on leave, I decided, when I come back, I want to do my own thing. Like I've been working in the genetics of education, but I don't know if it's my area. I really want to get back into mental health. And I decided, what if I write a grant? What if I write a grant? I've never written a grant before, but what if I write a grant and I really write it about what I care about, what I'm interested in, and I pour, all of me into that, what can happen? And so I submitted this grant application, and many, many months later, to my utter surprise, I got the grant. And that's what brought me here to Norway. And I've been here now for 4 years. And there's a number of reasons, that I feel very motivated in circumstances where I get invited, as I did here so graciously, to talk to you about imposter syndrome. There's so many reasons that it is such a full yes when this offer comes up. One is because, as I said, I've worked and lived and existed in research groups in different cities, within different countries, within different continents. And the talk of and the recurring themes of imposter syndrome, it's shocking, it's happening across the places and people are really struggling. There's also the fact that, I have been struggling and continue to struggle with imposter syndrome. And I think like, okay, Ziada, we all are individuals and that, but surely it can't just be you. And, at some point I thought, okay, let me take that. It must not just be me feeling, and let me say it out loud. What if I say, what, hey guys, I'm really struggling with imposter syndrome. And so many people said, yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm also really struggling. So, if I'm struggling, surely someone else is. And something that really motivates me to continue talking about this topic is that each time I speak about imposter syndrome in any scenario, I always learn something. Somebody gives something back about their experiences. I share what I've learned along the way, and somebody gives something back. And I really believe, and I adapt and I take up that on because I do think, the best solutions is always when we co-create. Like I can't single-handedly solve imposter syndrome, either can you. But I think if we work together, I do think that we can figure out how to tackle this and how to, seriously deal with this problem. And a major motivation for me is to pay it forward. I remember so vividly when, I was still in London and I got news that, I was going to get this position and I was going to get all this funding to go and, do this research that I said I wanted to do. And I remember feeling so crippled with the idea that I'm like, oh my good God, I have to go to this center on the other side of the planet and they're going to think I'm this kind of way because I got this kind of grant and I'm going to show up and be like, just kidding, it's me. And I felt like I need to contact the ERC. I need to contact whatever, whomever is involved and say, like, take the money back. It's not me. And I remember really struggling with this. And at the time, as I said, I was at the SGDP Center and I was going to make a pivot, right? I was working in education and I was going back to mental health, specifically in depression. And when I looked around me, somebody who felt like such a big powerhouse in the field of genetics of depression was Catherine Lewis. And I was like, Catherine, if Catherine Lewis says that I can do this, then maybe I can do this. So I very randomly asked her to have a meeting with me. And I went into that room and I just poured it out. I said, this is what I told them I can do. This is what I feel like I'm capable of doing. Do you think I can actually do this? And I said, I'm really struggling with imposter syndrome. And I was so surprised when she said, yeah, but yeah, I feel that way all the time. And I was like, you? The Catherine Lewis, you feel imposter syndrome? Are you kidding? But she said to me, you can feel it, but you can't let it stop you. And there was something about it that just stuck with me. And I've had so many people who have supported me, who have cheered me on when I felt like I'm not the person to do the thing. There's been so many people who have, helped and supported me, living in different countries without, the same support of my family and that. And there's been so many chosen family members who've helped me. And so I do think it's important that I'm like, okay, if I stay, I got to give back a little bit. So it does feel like paying it forward. So why should we be concerned? Why should we care about imposter syndrome? I think there's a number of reasons we should care. One is the very fact that we all, I think in some capacity, if you work in research, something you do somehow touches mental health. So we work in mental health, and the people who are doing the research on improving mental health, their mental health is often suffering. And I'm like, this can't be the case. We see so much burnout. We see talent drain. So, as I said, I've seen so many people who I did my PhD with or who I trained in my first postdoc with, who I felt were brilliant, really out of the box thinkers who left academia because they said, you know what, I'm not cut out for this. I'm not good at this, Um, I really think that something can happen to the quality of the research questions we have. I think we need variability. We need different opinions, different track records, different lived experiences. That's how we get, better and unique and novel research questions. And I think, if we make an environment that is so aggressive, I think there's only a few types of folks who are going to manage and succeed in it, and that will reduce the variability and I think the quality of the research questions that we can ask. And this also, impacts our kind of global competitiveness. And something I've been really interested in lately is what does this do to public trust in science? Because, I think there is something that happens when there is some kind of demystifying of what does it mean to do academia? What does it mean to succeed in academia? Who does succeed in academia? And I think there's something that can happen when we, open up um, this area, to more people. I think that that is a great way that we can feel like so many members of the public are being represented in their ideas and their thoughts. So the word, imposter syndrome, or this phrase imposter syndrome, it dates back, to the 70s. And but imposter syndrome comes up in so many domains and in so many disciplines, but there's some factors that are really unique to and specific drivers within academia. And these are three kind of core aspects that come out in the literature. So one is this feeling of inadequacy. Another is perfectionism. And the third are these peer comparisons. And I think what's really important, just in general, when we're talking about these factors, is really trying to think about all of the contributing factors that can heighten these experiences of imposter syndrome. And I really, really urge us to think intersectionally here. But I think the term intersectionality has become this kind of buzz phrase, and it seems to often only refer to one or two aspects. And I think we need to remember that there are so many intersecting identities. That means that, in some aspects, folks are really, having compound effects that are, really heightening their experience of imposter syndrome. Sometimes there's, conflicting factors, but this idea of intersectionality covers, race, ethnicity, gender identity, class, language, religion, ability, sexuality, mental health, age, education, body size. There's so many, many, many more factors. And all of these factors kind of intersect when we think of what do we imagine when we think of somebody is in academia? What does it mean to be good in academia? Who gets rewarded in academia? Who struggles more with imposter syndrome? All of these intersecting identities must be considered when we think about these kind of core factors in academia. So, feelings of inadequacy. This is this idea that, despite because the people are qualified, hey? Despite the qualifications, despite the achievements, even when receiving the grant, even when getting the job, even when being invited to do the lecture, you feel like you're still not genuinely competent. You're worried that you're going to be exposed, that someone's going to call you out as a fraud. I remember so many times I did my PhD very closely with somebody else. And I remember in my PhD, I remember in my postdoc, I remember in many different positions, if I get an email, from whoever is my supervisor, my team lead, I'd be like, here it comes. I'm getting fired. Like, they found me out. This constant feeling that you're just not, you're just not there. You're not really competent at what you're doing. There's perfectionism, which is something that really comes up and really uniquely impacts academia. So this is this idea of constantly trying to achieve these, unrealistic, unattainable standards and to be flawless. This idea that, we will not make mistakes and that it's, catastrophic if we make a mistake and these kind of ideas. And this, is linked to, greater feelings of anxiety and quite harmfully for academia for lower productivity. So often when people are holding on to this real perfectionist idea of, what their output is going to look like, they can't quite get the stuff out. Because you're going over it and going over it and triple checking and quadruple checking and being uncertain. Maybe you're avoiding it entirely. I've seen this come up from me and many people where you're just like, yeah, yeah, I'll do this analysis at some point, and then that paper just hangs over your head for ages. I feel like if I was in the room right now, I could see you nodding with me. Another big one that comes up within academia are these peer comparisons, right? So we measure our own expertise against what we perceive to be accomplishments and expertise of our peers. And this is really tough because, we're in a unique little world when we're doing our higher education, our masters, our PhDs, our postdocs, our whatever. Like we are in a scenario that is not the average everyday scenario. And we also have a lot of visibility. I remember LinkedIn can be a hard one. I feel like it's shifting now, and I do need to get back onto it. But for previously, I found LinkedIn and all of these kind of academic social media places, I found them so stressful because it was just I feel so grateful because I just got this amazing promotion and I got this amazing grant and this other amazing paper has come out, even though you just finished reading the previous paper that I put out. And so you feel like everybody is just sprinting ahead of you and you're behind. And that's really a difficult one within academia. So, I could spend a lot of time defining what imposter syndrome is to you, but I feel like we are all in this space because we know it in our bodies. We know what it feels like. We know the impact of it because we've lived it, we've seen it. But I think what is valuable for all of us is to think about what can we do? What can we do to move past this kind of this paralyzing state of imposter syndrome and into a place where we can make some movement and we can make some shifts? So, one of the first things that I learned and what, really sticks with me, not only in terms of, when I join a new group, when I, start a new project, what have you, is really trying to understand, okay, what is actually needed to do this thing and when? So I think what can be such a hindrance for so many folks when it comes to, should I apply for that position? Should I get that grant application on the way? Am I the person to do these analyses? Should I, volunteer to do that talk? Should I try for that position? Da 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 is that often the folks who really struggle with imposter syndrome and the idea that they're just not the ones that they're going to get caught out or whatever, is that they think that, and I mean too, is that all the skills that are needed to do that particular thing are needed on arrival. Like, you just got this position, you're going to walk in and they're like, "Brrr, here comes the test, do all the things you said you can do." It's really not the case. So I think what is important is understanding, okay, what do you need? What is it that you need? And it's very possible that what you need to do for this paper, for this project, for this PhD, for this whatever, is beyond your current skill set. But there are multiple steps before that you can do to build up your skill set and to figure out what you need to do. So I give you two examples of ways that I do this. One of the things that, I'm successful and at times not so successful at implementing is this idea of a learning day. I at least try and put it in my calendar. It used to be a full day. Life and academia is getting quite wild, so it's now moving to, half a day. So I typically try and do it on Monday mornings because we have a lab meeting that starts at noon. And I don't know, there's something about meetings in the first half of the day that just kind of throw off my whole morning. So I feel like if I have a very specific task in that first bit, then I can do it. And I often make that task a learning day. And I just try and think that, you know what? There was a time when we were generous with our ideas that we can take time to learn. That was back when we were young. And then for some reason, we feel like we can't do that anymore. Well, what if we built in some learning time? And I try and break down those steps. I have a picture of the French flag here because um, one of the best examples of this that has taught me that, like, okay, actually, there's what you want to do, and then there's all these steps that, like, you can do before is learning another language. So, my sons are, one quarter French, and I really wanted them to speak many languages. And as it so happened, we started with French, right? Because they have this French ancestry. And I remember at the beginning being like, I want to be fluent in French and just trying to jump right into the most complicated, I don't know, series online, the most complicated things, and really, really struggling. And then I started shifting what it means to be fluent in French in my mind. And I thought, you know what? Right now, they're at this age. To be fluent at this age means, I can talk about trains, I can talk about trucks. I can talk about crayons. Maybe I can talk about porridge, right? And I just figured out how to talk about that at that point. And then my sons got a bit older. So then it was like, okay, I want to figure out how to talk about school. I want to figure out how to talk about play dates. I want to figure out how to talk about development. And then kept going like this. And what was helpful about that is that I knew where I was heading to go, but I could break it down into what do I actually need to know now in order to get to where I want to go. One of the biggest things I highly suggest that we all start doing, you must have heard this in other places, but it is having this folder of your wins. I have one with my teaching wins because teaching is one of my favorite things to do. And there's been a few times when I've received some of the sweetest messages about a course that I taught or some supervision I got. And when I get those little emails or I get a like special kind of recognition, I put it in that folder and I go back to that folder when I'm feeling a little bit low to remind myself that it's like, okay, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm not the best statistician in the whole entire world, but hey, Johnny enjoyed my teaching that day, and it does help. It does make me feel better. Something that I really recommend us to do, especially, as early career researchers, I did this in my PhD. This was one of my favorite papers that I did. And what I mean by this is we need to start collaborating intentionally. So, as part of my PhD, I had various papers that I did, but I did this paper in collaboration with one of my dear friends, and we both had these like very specific methods that we felt equipped to do. So I felt like I could do this bit, she felt like she could do that bit. And we're like, what if we make a paper that is those two bits? You do your bit, I do my bit, and then we write the paper together. And then, we can be joint first authors. It's such an incredible experience. One, the paper happened so much quickly than it was so much more quickly than anything I've ever done before because it was fun, it was cute. We were transparent about what we were good at. I could say to this friend of mine, I was like, you know what, I'm just not really good at that thing. Like, you take care of it, but also, can you teach me a little bit of it? And we, taught each other a little bit more about these methods. And it was just a positive way that I was like, oh yeah, we don't always have to go it alone. One of the best bits of advice that I've had in talking to, people who are a bit further on in their career is this idea of deciding who you want to be. So I think when we're going through academia and, building up our careers, building up our portfolios, there is like a clear, what is being celebrated. We really feel like, methodological skill sets are the really key place. And there are some folks, like I see it here, the center I work in, there are people who live and breathe in formulas in a way that I wish I aspire to, but it is just not my life. But, we can contribute to the bigger picture of the questions we want from so many ways. There's some folks who develop the methods. That's their skill set. They develop those methods, they fine tune them, they love that process. And there's some people who use those methods to answer various questions. And both of those people are needed. Like, we need those people in academia. Of course, it exists that, those same people can be in one person, but often there's this bit of a dichotomy. And I think you can think about who you want to be and also understand that who you need to be shifts as you move across academia. So, in the kind of and in this early career stage set, it is, we need to build some analytical skills. We need to build some coding skills because it's us who are running the analyses. But I see it already. The amount of time that I spend coding now in comparison to when I did my PhD is hugely different. And when I think about my PhD supervisor, who, when was the last time that he opened up a computer and ran some code? I cannot tell you, decades probably. And it's important to remember that like what is needed in academia can shift. So if you want to still be writing the code, you can. You can be a methods developer, and that's kind of your skill set, and you maybe code with your lab or what have you. But if that, for example, is the clinch for you, if that's the bit that you're like, that's not my skill set, it's not always going to be what you need to do, right? We can niche down as we move through academia. One of the biggest things that has helped me is to remember to have friends outside of academia. I think it's so often that, we can create this little bubble where we are talking to each other, we're feeding off of each other's anxiety, our insecurities, etc. Something that happened kind of serendipitously for me when I did my PhD, I ended up doing it, technically part-time, while I also was a full-time research assistant. Side note to say, people, everything is full-time. But anyhow, and during this time, because of this kind of setup, I was in the kind of administrative office rather than, and me and another PhD, we together were in that office. And the rest of the PhD students were in like a PhD kind of shared room. And there was something about being in this separate office with people who were, the finance people, the project coordinator, somebody who's working in admin, like all of these different people in one room who were just doing different things, who were living life. I had someone who'd come in and say, "Oh, I just had my grandchild," and all of these things that happened. And there was something amazing about just having this reminder that not every single person in the world is trying to do their PhD. And our friends can be that as well. Our friends can be this reminder that not only is it pretty cool what we do, but it's also not the whole story. I think it's important to sometimes just not be so serious about the job because it does matter. It is important. We spend so much time in it, but it isn't the full you. I think living in Norway has also helped me a lot in that perspective because there is a very big difference in terms of work, life balance. But something that I'd also say that we really need to do is to say the thing out loud. I don't know why, it has become this like bad word to say we're struggling with imposter syndrome. I think so often, and this is the case with so many things we struggle with, that when we put words behind it, when we say it out loud, it kind of loses some of its power, isn't it? It's like you say it out loud and then somebody else feels brave enough to say, "Yeah, me too." And then all of a sudden you're two people struggling with this thing. And then maybe you start understanding that it isn't just you, it's kind of this whole setup that's making it feel this way. Um, and I think you also need to be critical about what this feeling of imposter syndrome is doing. And one of the ways that it can really show up is sticking in that planning stage. Like we can plan a project, we can plan an idea, we can, theorize about what we want to study for far too long. And that planning stage means it's ages before you just open up that computer and you start running the project code, or you start, engaging with a thing, or you send that email, or you follow up, or what have you. And often it's fear that's doing it. Name the fear. Name the fear. There's some people who suggest, giving that like imposter syndrome a name, like, here comes, I don't know, here comes Ronald again. Ronald, just trying to mess with my flow. You know what, Ronald? Not today. And I know it sounds really silly, but it actually is one of these ways that, you can personify this idea and separate it from yourself. And that can help people to really realize that it's something that's there, but it's not grounded in truth. It's grounded in these feelings. There's also things that you can do around, changing your idea of what academia looks like and who are academics. So, for me, this has been, so I think maybe a year ago, I started an Instagram account because I felt really frustrated. I felt like, there's bits of academia that are really, really impacting me. I don't feel like I'm, feeling good at what I'm doing. I don't think that, I just had feelings of frustration and I wanted to get back to that feeling of remembering why is it that I do this? What is it that I'm passionate about? And that for me is communicating mental health. But I also had a slightly selfish reason for setting up this page. And I think it was because I wanted to remind myself to be for myself this visual that is like, okay, you know what? I, te I technically have a PhD. This is true. I do work in psychiatric genetics. That's true. I am a genetic epidemiologist. Okay. And to just see that and to remember that and to put that out there. And it helped remind me that, you know what? There are many ways to be an academic, and my way is a valid way too. Something that I really think people need to do a lot more is something I call stealing advice. So, I think it's fantastic when we can have people who, offer us skills and offer us advice and tell us what we should do. But I think there's also ways that we can be a little cheeky and we can steal it. So, one of the ways I try to do this is I often, I'm so fascinated by people. So, I do pay attention when I see that somebody's doing something well. And then I just, I ask them, like, how do you do that? So, for example, I worked as a course coordinator with somebody here who I knew was more busy than me. Like, there was no way I was more busy than she was. Like, she is a professor, she has so much on. And I was like, I know I'm not the most busiest person in this duo. But she would be on it with emails. Like she just managed emails in a way that I was like, I don't know how you keep on top of this stuff. Because I also see some people who are a bit chaotic. And I was feeling like I was getting a bit chaotic with this as well. And I asked her, I'm like, what does your workday look like? Like, how do you do this? And she told me what her trick is and what are things that work for her and things that haven't worked. And I noted it and I started doing it. And it's been so helpful for me. So steal advice, ask people, speak to people. I think one of the ways that imposter syndrome can really impact us is, at least for me, is struggling to know what I should be working on because I can feel really intimidated by a particular thing and kind of subconsciously avoid it and work on this other thing that I feel more capable of. When in reality, the thing I'm avoiding is actually the most important for my work. It's the most important for my career. It's the most important, I don't know, for my development, right? And so when I have this scenario, for example, I have, four tasks that I need to do. A couple of them are for me. Something is like reviewing somebody else's work. Another thing is preparing for some teaching. And I don't actually know what I should be prioritizing. I talk to it like a trusted friend, a trusted partner, a mentor, and I lay it out and I say, you know what? This is my goal. This is what's important for me this month or for my career. This is where I see myself. And these are the things that I need to do. Can you help me figure out like what is a priority? And I do that as a mentor for people who I'm a mentor for. And I think that's a really helpful way that if you do have somebody who you trust, you can bring to them in some scenarios, your time management and just help them to remind you what is the most important thing. One of the things that I think is really important is this idea of separating academia from science. I have so many times wondered, why on earth am I in academia? I've had people say, why are you in academia? I've felt like I shouldn't be in academia. But when I am relaxed, when it is the holidays, when I'm with my sons, and they ask me a question that I don't have the answer to, the way that joy comes into my body to like deep dive and research that thing. Like, it can be whatever, it can be something random. My son's like, oh, but how does this work? Is that really, how far would it take to go across the world on a boat or whatever? Some random question. And the joy that I have in kind of digging and finding the answer, this curiosity that I see that comes up in me when I feel relaxed and when I feel safe reminds me that I love science. I am a scientist. I'm curious. I want answers. Um, but academia is tough. But it's not always the same thing. That's academia is the job. I think science is really the love affair, and you need to understand that those are two separate things and try and create the job and understand and separate the job and hold on to the pure joy for the science that I do think a lot of us have. And the last little bit of what I think we can do is protect our peace. Yeah. So I think sometimes I remember talking to somebody who doesn't work in academia, and I was saying, oh, the dream that I would have is if I was able to, I would love to start my day a little bit earlier and end a little bit later, and maybe I'd like to do this or what have you. And I realized that I was like, wait, the person who I was speaking to was like, yeah, but you can. But can't you do that? You don't work a 9 to 5. And I was like, I don't work a 9 to 5. So, within reason, I do think that, there is value to being, everybody in the office at times. There's value to seeing your colleagues. There's importance, so much importance on doing things together, building that team spirit. But I also think you need to protect your peace. And there are times when you just need to be like, I think I'm going to sit this one out and trust in that. Do that at a rate that is not harmful for, your end goals of your career, but do consider how you can protect your peace. Sometimes protecting your peace means learning desperately how to say no. Sometimes protecting your peace means working remotely. Sometimes protecting your peace means having a friend who you write a message to with 700 emojis and say, did you see what just happened? Or I feel this kind of way, whatever. Protect your peace, find some ways to do that. So, a lot of times that I've been in talks about imposter syndrome, the discussions have ended there. What can you do? What can you do to make it better? Um, but I urged us to think intersectionally. I also urge us to think structurally, that there are structural factors in place that mean that imposter syndrome is fueled. The fire of imposter syndrome is fueled. So I really think it is important to think what can do. And they can mean many things. They can mean other members of your team. They can mean supervisors, they can mean, decision makers, um, faculty, heads of faculty. There's so many people that these days can be, but I've learned some tricks, and I've seen, and I've observed some key changes that I think should be and could be made to help impact imposter syndrome. Now, one of them is this kind of core concept that I want you to hold on to, this idea of preparing for your new hire. I think it really starts like we need a good start. Prepare for your new hire like a dinner guest you were expecting. So I said to you that, I'm Ugandan and food is important. Like food is serious stuff. And from being young, we always had this thing that, if you make dinner, you make a little bit extra because somebody might come that you didn't intend to have. But when we know somebody's coming for dinner, we prepare. You think about what's that person like? What does that person need? Does that person have any dietary requirements? Um, one of the ways that I've seen people prepare for dinner guests, I once was going to dinner at somebody's house. I'd never been to their house before, and they lived on the fifth floor and there was no elevator. And they said, just as a heads up, this is my address. I'm on the fifth floor. You know, is that going to be okay for you? If you can manage, at the top of the stairs, there'll be a glass of water. And it's just this feeling, that, oh, they were anticipating me. We need to give that to people. We need to prepare for our new hires like a dinner guest. This means that we want to anticipate what their needs are. This can be from a single person to groups of people. Anticipate what the needs are. What can we do to ease that transition? Because I think so much about that early stage can really set people on good or not so good trajectories. And I would argue that this new higher stage, one, lasts longer than the first week. I think it's like we're new for 6, 8 months. And two, can be recreated. Yeah. I think at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the academic year, you can think of people as your new hires. And you can think about how you can prepare that space for them, that work environment for them, anticipate what folks need. One of the biggest things I think we need to do is be explicit about our expectations. So I just recently wrote a grant application, which was all about relationships in mental health research. And I think we don't realize how many relationships we navigate when we are in a supervisory kind of setting. And so often we're not explicit about what we anticipate. This can be heightened with cultural differences. So, for example, I work in Norway and people want to give people a lot of autonomy. And so that means that there's a like indirectness about academia such that nobody will say exactly what they want you to do. And I have struggled with this. I have struggled with this because um, I've sometimes had the feeling that maybe I wasn't quite doing the right thing, but no one would say I wasn't quite doing the right thing. And so then I try another thing, and that also felt like not quite right. And I think we can be a bit explicit about our communication. We can say like, what does it look like to do well in our group? What are the expectations you have for people, for your new hire, for your team member, for collaboration, for co-authorship? Explicit communication of expectations means that everybody's aware, and this guesswork. And this over guesswork and this, silent trial and error that happens in imposter syndrome can get removed. One of the best things I've seen somebody do is to remember their power. So, I've had scenarios where a group was supposed to brainstorm and we were trying to come up with great ideas. And the head of the team would remove himself. He stepped out of that room and he said, I want you guys to kind of brainstorm, write what you found in a document and just email it to me when you're done. And it was amazing because our shoulders dropped. People started saying silly ideas. People started talking about things. We felt like a group trying to find a common goal. Versus times when I've seen, the head of the team stay in that room. And then you get all of these individual differences in people's personalities, some cultural factors where people are like, oh, I don't feel comfortable to speak. There's a dynamic that I'm not supposed to be the one speaking. There's, big people who take up space comfortably and dominate a conversation. There's people who feel like I just have nothing to contribute. And so they're silent and they just feel worse and worse and worse every time. So think about when you should step out of the room. Another key thing is watching what you reward. So academia, we know we can't change the whole business model of what it is to do well in academia, publish or perish, right? Like we know that there are these factors that I wish would change, but there's time before that will happen. But within our like smaller settings, we can think about what we reward. So, often I see, institutions do things about rewarding publications. I think it's great to do that across the board and, mention so and so got a publication. But I always also think about the folks who, developed a really great pipeline that helps folks. Is that being contributed? Somebody who's important in organizing and keeping this group cohesion, who provides a lot of support for people in terms of where do they access this information. Is that being celebrated? We need to watch what we reward and also ditch this whole idea of soft skills because all of the skills that we bring to academia are needed. Yeah, they're all needed. I do think that we do need more training around how to meet diverse group needs. I think this is something that is differentially implemented across different countries and different places. But I think so many of the research groups that I'm a part of seem to be getting more and more international. Maybe that will shift. I'm not sure. The world is an interesting place right now. But it means that we need to have skills around how do we work with different people, with different experiences, different cultural backgrounds, and have training around that um, so we can meet those needs better. One of the biggest things that I've seen that can influence and that we need to be, understanding in terms of adjusting the needs in a group and meeting those needs is considering how group size changes the needs of groups. So I've seen so often, groups that started off with just a handful of people who felt really emotionally connected to the group, who felt this like cohesion and understanding of what was happening. And then you get big grants, and then all of a sudden the group goes from 4 people to 7 people to 9 people to 10 people. And then all of a sudden there's tension. And we see this across business. This is not a new dynamic. This happens. There's like models of studying this within, businesses that as the group suddenly gets really big, we lose this feeling of um, attachment to the understanding of what the group means. The group gets less cohesive. And this can be a really difficult transition stage for a group. So it's really important to still build in some structures around that. And I'd love to talk about some ideas I have around that potentially later if we have some time. Training I've mentioned, but I really will mention again, like I do think we need to acknowledge that heads of teams, heads of departments, anybody who works in academia and has somebody who they, support, they're both managers, they're parents, they're therapists, they're life coaches, like they're playing so many roles. And I don't think that we acknowledge that and that we support and train and give the skills needed to manage all of those roles. I think that there are a lot of things that can feel like this pent-up resentment. I always say that, especially within, relationship dynamics, that resentment is one of the real big, killers to dynamics going well. So we need to distribute what we consider this academic housekeeping, the like remember the setting up the lab meetings, organizing for invited guests, remembering lab birthdays, like all of these factors are important for this feeling of like a team. And this is also, these teams can be, research groups, these teams can be bigger, but we need to distribute this academic housekeeping evenly. So it's not just some folks who are doing that and are seen as these kind of caretakers and other folks who are doing the real core science, right? I think mentorship schemes are so valuable. Mentorship has been extremely helpful for me in terms of, getting support outside of where I am as well. I've worked in some centers where I felt like I had access to people who could be mentors and who have mentored me. And I've also felt very isolated in centers before. And in those times, I've often reached out to people who could be my mentors. And now I mentor people, which is one of my favorite things. And I think people often wonder, oh, should I ask this person to be a mentor? I feel so touched when people mentor me, ask me to mentor them. Um, but I'd also say building this into the institution is quite helpful too, so that we don't have, people who are doing mentoring not managing to do their work and the same people being asked for mentors. So there's, ways that you can implement that as a scheme that is like organized through your department. One of the things that I think we really, really need to do is that so much of the support that is needed around imposter syndrome and its kind of many knockoff effects, we might have resources around that. But if we imagine, you're new in a country, you're new in a place, you're really struggling, you're feeling isolated, you don't have friends and family around, and you just think like, I'm actually not good at this. The uphill battle to navigate a new mental health system is profound. And I really think we need to provide, clear guidance to how people can get to mental health support. Who do you contact? How do you contact them? If this is in a different language, where are translations? Like, what are your rights? I think it's really important for that information to be accessible for people. Okay, so I've talked to you a lot about what you could do as a given individual. I hope you're still there with me. Okay. Yeah, so I've talked to you a lot about what you can do as individuals. I've also talked about what institutions can do. But I would say one of the things that is very difficult, so I've also served on a number of boards that have the intent to, improve academia for folks or what have you. And we've hit a number of hurdles, right? There's been, can you even develop this particular program that you want in your institution? You see this problem, but can you do this kind of thing about it? And it can be very difficult when we're working and hitting the wall against institutions which are notoriously reluctant to change, right? And so this is where I say we need to remember that institutions are made up of people and that we can not try, and maybe we will fail currently to try and change the whole institution, but we can change the behaviors and the practices of people within that institution. And I really think research groups are the key places to do this. There can be a culture of academia, but there can be a culture of science in your research groups. And I think if we start prioritizing and creating that culture of curiosity, of safe spaces to ask questions, of it's okay to make a mistake, of learning in our groups of people, then I think that will have a ripple effect on institutions. So I leave you with one of the biggest bits of advice and what I've been really trying to do, as I stay in academia. And this is this idea of building the research group that I needed, you know? And maybe you're not at the stage of building a research group. Maybe you're not at the stage of recruiting new people. So it could be just building the set of collaborators that you needed, right? We live in such a global state. You can collaborate with the people who are immediately there with you, your current research group, but you can also collaborate outside of that. So build the research group or a set of collaborators that you needed. And that can mean so many different things for so many different people. But for me, what that means is one, clear onboarding. Yeah, that I'm anticipating you coming, and here is, the booklet of what you need. So many people join groups with some real clear expertise. There is something that those people can do and they can do well. But before they can get to do the thing that they do well, they need to figure out how on earth it works in this new place, in this new system, in this new computing environment. I see that with people in so many different institutions. So create that onboarding document. I've done that, and I continue to do that in every institution I've been in, and I share that. I think that we need core group skills. As I said, the family can be the group, and I think that it doesn't make sense that we have competition within. I think it doesn't make sense that there's one person in the group who's really good at something, and everybody else is really rubbish at that thing. I think that we should have core group skills, that this group is good at doing these methods, this form of communication, this what have you. And we build each other up to make sure that that core skills in our group, that we are all really good at that. One thing that I think is hugely important is our first win. So that first paper, that first project, that first set of analyses that somebody does is so important in building that bit of confidence. So you want to give whoever is joining your team, you want to give them a sure first win, right? The first project doesn't have to be the biggest thing we've ever done in our entire life, changing the world. Like we can get there, but let us start a little slow and sweet. Group authorship strategy. I think so often, we can struggle with publications, getting publications for everybody to get chances with publications within academia, and having a strategy as a group is how we handle publications, and being explicit about that means, we can, I don't know, we can brainstorm and make sure we have, a big paper that comes out from our group each year, and it's a different first author who leads that big paper, for example. And that means that and multiple people in the group are co-authors on that paper. It means we can really churn out our authorship in a different way. I'd say stack your team. You need to understand what is it that your goal is of your team and what do you need, and stack your team with people who have different ideas, different experiences, because it's so cool to be part of a brainstorming scenario when someone's like, I used to work in this field and I had this idea, and then, that's interesting because in my area of research, we used to do this. These are the most vibrant projects and the greatest ideas come out of that. But I'd also say it's important to remember, what is your long-term plan, and have a long-term plan for the group. Have a goal of, what you guys are intending, and be intentional about working towards that. And I'll leave you with the last little bit of this like little question, because I'd be lying to you if I said that I've never thought about leaving academia. I have thought so many times. I've come very close to leaving academia because I felt like I'm not the person for this. I can't survive this scenario. This is not for me. But I've stayed, and I organized this monthly seminar called the Genetics Network, and it's a monthly seminar where I invite different academics across the kind of globe to come and talk about their work either in person or they do it virtually. And last time I had somebody called Katie Thompson, and she's a researcher who's based at Purdue University. So you guys will know Katie. And Katie came in and talked about her research. She presented on methods that were novel to the group that was part of the seminar, but she's presented them in a way that people really understood. We had this amazing kind of brainstorming period afterwards, as the people who were online and who were there. And Katie talked about how she was going to be applying for a grant application. And I just applied for a grant application. And some other people who I work with just applied for a grant application. And it made me think, because in that room at that point, I felt so hopeful about academia. I felt really positive about what we could do. And so it made me think about like, what if we stay? And what if it's us who are hiring, and us who are building research groups, and us who are shaping science? Like, what if we are the ones to do that. I don't know. It makes me very happy to imagine. So, with that, I'd like to thank you and leave a little space for any questions or comments. And it's been wonderful to share my ideas with you.